Welcome everyone to the West East Poetry Reading Series, a bi-monthly series of poetry readings that have been put together largely at the instigation of Lynn, McGee, and Susana H. Case back east, who brought aboard Bill Mohr and Carolyne Wright. And we've been enjoying this for about almost half a year now. The next reading, just to give you that heads up, will be on January 17th. We don't have everybody who's going to be reading present, but I believe that Jessica Greenbaum will be leading it off, hopefully followed by Gary Copeland, Bertha Rogers, and Ellen Bass. So without much ado, I turn it over to Susana, who's going to introduce Jessica.
So Jessica writes, that's where I come in when she's describing how she starts off out in her family's hotel in Monticello in upstate New York. And what draws me to Jessica's work is the distinctive voice of place, of Brooklyn, of a beach in Chile, wherever she is. There's a humor, there's an optimism, and there's a way she locates herself within the canon of poetry in a work that's often dedicated to friends or family. There's a whole page in the book of, or maybe there was even two, of people who she's dedicating the poems to. And in my opinion, her ode to an espresso maker or a potato peeler or a serrated knife is right up there with the odes of Sharon Olds and Pablo Neruda. And I had the honor of reading with Jessica Greenbaum at the Hudson Valley Writers Center around the time that the two Yvonnes came out, which was her previous collection. And so with the new book, Spilled and Gone, I'm just thrilled to be hearing her read again today. Jessica, you are on. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Susana. Thanks to the West East Bi-Coastal Poets of the Pandemic and Beyond. And it's true, Susana and I love crossing paths. I love that we show up and we see each other. And her new book, Dead Shark on the N Train, excellent. Even if you're not a little nostalgic for the subway, it might make you so. Just great poems. And I'm really so chuffed to be reading with Bertha and Gary and Ellen. So thanks to everybody who came. Really appreciate it. This reading starts at the beginning of the pandemic where I'm not wearing glasses, and it ends a few mornings ago where I am. But I want to thank Elaine Sexton for printing this first poem and her beautiful edition of To Horatio, Going for a Run Without My Glasses. Because they fog up with the mask on. So I thought I would try it, and I started in the park on the early rainy side of spring, the light green trees like a tune that was going to get louder with added bass by June, and the crabapple and cherry blossoms like lacy colored clouds fallen over some branches. And the next time around, I thought they were held up by the branches. And after a squint, I realized that the blue patches on the ground were only dropped gloves, even though I'd passed a trash can the next moment. But I liked seeing the whole park as a moving composition, as if in a CAD cam as I jogged around it. And on the dark morning, someone walked by with a yellow briefcase, and they might have been a wandering tulip. And for a split second, where to, I wondered. This poem, moving through the seasons, gets a little warmer, gets into summer, and this is the poem of parents who no longer watch their children at the beach but go by themselves, called The Two of Us Leaving the Beach. We'd gone in the water at the same time, and later read and went for a long walk, first brushing off as much sand as I could from the legs of the canvas camp chair, then collapsing it, appreciating again the design that narrowed it to the width of a fat umbrella, then hoisting it with my right arm so I could tuck it under my left and hug it there, the feet in front of me, then managing the fitted cover, slipping it over the tips, then helping it up, past the wider middle, my left hand trying to help my right, but the left arm still holding the chair to keep it off the ground. So of course, I thought of them, of that last ritual of a beach day, long spent watching, hoisting each of them when they were young enough, and hugging them to me with my left arm while leaning on the hard-to-press button of the outdoor shower with my right, the cold water, the last smiling shout bracing us back into ourselves, like that solution called Fixer that sets a photograph being developed, then toweling them off while holding them, slipping on their clothes, determined at this delicate point, which might be any point, determined to keep any grains of sand from their freshened, ringing bodies. I had a recent dream about my long ago life in Houston, Texas, and this is from that, and I'll tell you how it relates to the pandemic afterwards. 427 Marshall Street, 1980. You walked towards me on the street. It took a moment to be sure after 4 decades. Our eyes locked. Then right after we passed each other, I looked back and said, why not just a little hello? A dream, of course, which accounts for your full head of hair. Although I can't visualize my own body from those years, thinner, but also heavier, carrying love enough for both of us. What I see with perfect clarity is the hibachi grill, a black grid the length of a legal pad, set down in the side yard of that house in the Montrose, under the 2-story tree whose papery orange flowers brushed against my top floor windows like a snare drum. I'll just add that my 3 antisocial housemates comprised a mini Winesburg, Ohio, in the era when a house phone hung on the kitchen wall. And if tired after work, I might answer as if I was still in the bookstore. And also, John Lennon died and there was no one to grieve with. And one hot night, you came over with your best friend who suggested we cook a duck, which I didn't know possible. The unpackaged bird seemed like a chicken made into a pillow and filled with rubber cement. And I've never forgotten roasting it on the grill, draining cups of fat like I was bailing out a boat. And by the end, it was so diminished, I wouldn't have recognized it. And I have no memory whatsoever of how it tasted or if your friend addressed one single question to me all those years. And the tree? It's the only part of the scene I care about and wonder if it still lives and if people are better now and see more clearly. So I think it's safe to say that only in a time of lockdown and pandemic would A&M's forestry department suggest, after a couple of emails back and forth where neither of us could quite get the tree right, I think it's only in a pandemic they would suggest that maybe their Houston ranger could just swing by the address and check out the tree. This next poem talks about a cold day in Spain when my friend Vicky Ward and her husband James McRae had a travel company called Camino Tours, and we got ferried about sometimes by them. The first really cold day. Plugging in the portable heater and pulling it toward my legs, I remembered the braziers under the round table at the finca you brought us to in the Spanish Hills. It was January, a searingly cold afternoon, and in a cave-like room we sat with the sisters who worked there. The tablecloth pulled over our thighs, and we might all have been knitting together or divvying provisions. It was a sudden, short-lived society, and in between envisioning all the accidents born from live embers near legs and beneath cloth, I experienced the little miracle of it, the conversation, bright and unintelligible to my schoolroom Spanish, you chatting easily, as engaged as a car in 3rd gear, making your own jokes while agreeing enthusiastically. And I could follow the music of it, the lead up and the laughter, because I knew the cadence of your conversation like a winding path through the woods. We had wended through many woods in many weathers. And because of all that, neither of us knew then of the illnesses to come and the reality of those women's lives that we'd conveniently cropped out at that moment. This could have been a childhood we lived in together for that sheltered hour, before we walked back into the cold, crossing paths with the owner's teenage daughter in her jodhpurs and riding boots. And what we still laugh about was the open pack of licorice she held in one hand and the fork she used to pierce the pieces with the other. You don't eat with your hands in Spain, not even a shrimp. You have to have like a surgical maneuver. This poem is in memory to my friend Daniel Hausberg. Reading about Keith Jarrett this morning in the paper. How he probably won't play in public again because of 2 strokes he suffered. I remembered your Boston College dorm room, probably 1978, when you played live at Colne for me. And we lay next to each other in the twilight and listened, and we looked at the album cover for a while. And there was a moment, many moments, when you could hear Jarrett exclaiming or uttering. It was like a secret language created from creating. And it was shocking because I hadn't ever heard a trained pianist play anything other than the keys and subsume the self to them in silence. And I remember we just lay next to each other in the twilight and listened. And we just lay next to each other in the twilight and listened because we were always friends. And this music was another thing you taught me. And all the years I knew you, since we were 7, I was learning from you. About adventure, about animals, or about climbing over the wall of the little planetarium on Long Island, or about fishing at 2 a.m. for salmon in the June night in Talkeetna, because you had moved to Alaska years earlier. And if you weren't used to that hazy, surreal brightness, which of course I wasn't, it easily doubled for a dream. And later I met you at the Grand Canyon. Oh, but this shouldn't be another list because so much else would need to be on it. I was just remembering listening to Jarrett with you. And after the plane went down, after I named my first child with whom I was then 8 months pregnant, after I gave her a feminine version of your name for her middle name, after that, jazz pretty much went back to its very narrow compartment in my mind. Just Jarrett and the Ron Paul album you also played for me, and that Coltrane track I found when I was babysitting in high school, which I didn't know was famous, but you were always famous to me. And that track can only mean one thing now, that the shining earth had to be cleaned up, and it's always going to be after the rain. So I'll just finish with this little poem with a shout out to lovely community in Salisbury, Connecticut that I've been grateful to get to know. And it's called The Poem I Wrote 2 days after the election was called. That morning broke just as beautifully as the 2 days before. Having celebrated, the shouts called us out from wherever we were, and we did dance in the streets. The glee was collective and all out. It didn't leave us at any point, and any wahoo set off a wave of them. Having celebrated, we drove the next day to the country and paddled to the middle of the still lake and sat with our closed eyes facing the late afternoon sun. And then came to the yard of friends, and in the center of our socially distanced chairs, joy itself seemed so visceral. It might have been someone's child having recovered from a terrible illness and now singing to us. Later, the constellations became so clear, it was like the optometrist had slipped on the right lens for the prescription. And the middle of the night threw a moon shadow bright enough to see my way outside the cabin. And the next morning, the morning 2 days after the election was called, broke just as cloudless and beautiful as the 2 days before. And I remember that I walked down to the water thinking, this is a day to see how clearly poetry throws itself on the world again and everywhere. The whole place like the gentle-most mosh pit. And because the late autumn sun rose more to the right, I sat on the wobbly raft pulled up close to the shore for winter to see it better, to write a poem in celebration of how you can see the poems and how joy casts itself. And I remember I saw the great friendship between the sun and its changing reflection on the lake, like the combinations and recombinations of the dancing crowds, but without the freneticism, because it was established. It was day 2. And I remember ending the poem in some way that felt quite right at the time, and with the surprise that always accompanies writing about happiness, and then not pulling the raft close enough to the land before stepping off, and falling in while trying to throw the laptop to safety, and diving in the cold water with my glasses on to retrieve it, but too late, and this is what now drips in relief. Thank you to everybody, and thanks again, Susana, for that really, really gracious, generous intro, and to everyone for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jess. I don't see Gary unless he's under a different name, so maybe we should move now to Bertha.
So I'll introduce Bertha, and we'll move to Gary after, if he's here. And I also know, Bertha, that you mentioned that the electricity has been off and on in the Catskills where you are. So we will all understand if you aren't able to, if you go in and out. It's my honor to introduce Bertha Rogers, who has made a significant contribution to poetry in America, not only through her own fine work and her translations of the Anglo-Saxon riddles, but by co-founding with her husband, Ernest Fishman, who we remember fondly, the Bright Hill Press and Literary Center in the Western Catskills in 1992. I remember where I was sitting on a snowy Saturday in the leather chair in my living room as I read Heart Turned Back by Bertha Rogers, and released from Salmon Poetry in 2010. The book has that kind of impact. One of my favorite poems in Heart Turned Back is about a girl buried in a peat bog in the 1st century AD. The empathy in the speaker's voice in that poem and throughout Heart Turned Back creates a kind of time travel, and I guarantee you will remember where you first read it as well. In the same way, when reading Bertha's translations of the 95 Anglo-Saxon riddles contained in the Book of Exeter, it is easy to imagine a family gathered around the fire in their thatch-roofed hut, playing word games charged with their belief in monsters and spirits, and creating an oral tradition of literature that was codified by monks and decoded by Bertha Rogers 1,000 years later. It took more than 10 years for Bertha to create the illuminations that accompany the riddles using watercolors, acrylics, and other materials, including gold leaf. I have been fortunate enough to see the illuminations in Bertha's studio, to hold the fine paper up to the light. And as I told her then, I'm pretty sure she was there around that fire. I think she was there telling riddles in the same way. And now we're going to get to the book Wild Again, which is the most recent book that you're looking at on your screen. In the same way, I'm pretty sure Bertha has lived lives both human and beast, and I'm serious about that. Bertha's most recent book, Wild Again, opens wide the parameters of what a poetic bestiary might be. These aren't persona poems, these are poems of embodiment. Please welcome the unique and audacious poetic spirit that is Bertha Rogers. You need to unmute yourself, Bertha. Where'd she go?
Okay, I'm there. Sorry. Okay. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to read with Jessica and Gary and Ellen. This is a terrific series, and I'm really happy to be part of it. So I'm going to read a few of the Anglo-Saxon riddle poems first. And I'll read the first one, the shortest one, in the Anglo-Saxon first, and then I'll read my translation. If I were doing this in your living room, I would ask you to guess the answer, but it's a little hard, so I'll tell you the answer after I read it in the Anglo-Saxon. Okay, this is number 45. The riddle is number 45. Ik onwid ridder je frefan, wherein that zinnen ontunnen thean hebben, on het van lesse bricka javoud, hillewe hondum rega thea prindela thinga dodas doter. I heard of a thing. Oh, the answer to this is bread dough. It's definitely has two meanings. I heard of a thing that grows in the dark. It breathes, blows from within, lifts up its hat. There was a bride girl who boldly lay hold of that body without bones. She cradled it, handled it. That daughter of a prince blanketed the wheezing creature with her own coat. Now, the Anglo-Saxons were masters of metaphor. So the second one I'll read is a tree, and all of them are infused with nature. I am sun-stunned, flame-woven, praise prodigal. I vixen the wind. I am gripped by gales and fondled by fire, ready for road, flowering wood or conflagration. I am lofted through the hall, hand over hand, while comrades glory me. Fine men and women clasp and kiss me, extol my strength, bow to me. I bring to many seasoned sanctity, graced blooming. And the third one is a fox. I am a warrior with a wide throat. My head and sides are tawny. 2 ears tower above my eyes. My back and cheeks are bristle-barbed. My gait is fleet, my winged flanks. I easily thread on my fighting feet green staves. Yet I sing a stricken song when the death hound comes sniffing my scant home. Then I hide my children, and we bide in a love circle while doom seeks our covert door. It moves above our trembling heads. That death bringer, fearful and foul, wishes to fetch us all, yawping to our slaughter. So handing and footing it, I gather my brood, swiftly secure a secret way out of the steep slope into the light, where I scurry my dear urchins, my babes, away from hurt's intent. I am a fortress against death. He may scent me on narrow paths, but I will turn whirling, tooth and claw, battle slipping that frenzied creature, the slay stroke, severing through touch and grip his hated neck. Through hill's roof, I will stay the course, fighting to the last. It is then I will see the whites of his eyes. And the next one is actually the sun, and this is on the cover of the book too. He who signifies victories, the Christ, made me to make war. Often I burn living souls on Middle Earth, terrorize them without touching bodies when the Lord rabbles me to fight. Sometimes I make light the thoughts in myriad hearts, gentle those I before opposed. Then they are warm, blessed as when they were burnt, or when through force and great sadness I again am there, grace at their leave-taking. And the last of the riddle poems I'll read is actually, it's an undersea earthquake or a storm. There are several storm riddles, and often the riddles talk about being on the sea because these were seafaring people. Sometimes I shock men, plunging under the weight of waves, seeking attack's door, the sea's floor. Filthy foam rips full of power through the whale's mirror, the streams. I beat, I savage the swells. At times I steal slope and hill as I flail, and I fight water and land, biting and stinging earth with storms. I may not swim until at last he who rules me drops me into the sea on the path foretold by the wise. Then I may be still until that ruler covers me, sends me where I learn calm. So those are the riddle poems, and there are 95 in the collection. So I'm going to read a few poems from Wilde again. And the first one I'll read is called To the Heart. I have taken up residence in the bear's black body. The bear's heart has devoured mine. I, all my thumping, am diminished. And the bear grows bigger. His seething face has absorbed all the day's light. His clawed paws are as turbulent as electricity at night. Heart, the sunflowers have been extinguished by hurled rays, and I am dead to the day. They told me I would discover morning, but here it is always night. Though the walls be red and flowing, blood moves, genome smart, but knowing not of itself, all its bodies sequenced and thwarted through paginated, booked, and shelved. The bear refuses to read the pages I was, spits me out. The blinded blinds move like flattened smiles in air's carried currents. Crows pick out, lay down words between light's molten lines. Never forget you. Never forget your thronged face, they cry. The bear is silent, his viral eyes red hot. And the next poem I'll read is called Hawk's Reason. When the hawk leaves his tree for movement among the green, when he aims earthward, the air opens for him as if sliced by a deft knife, space disappearing into time's aperture. The nosing gray vole, knowing she will cease, sharply screams twice. The hawk flexes lightning bright talons. His wings broadcast intent, close and break like thunder, dimming June's new blades. When the hawk's blazing claws wreathe the vole's rolling body, his gleaming beak arcs toward the fleet heart, and blood's first, deepest drop drops through blue. The whole sky opens, blameless and distinct. And this is a poem in the voice of a stone. It's called Stone and Stand. First, I was mountain, one among many, our shoulders shoved up rough. We jostled and pushed, seeking blue. We grew meager from the ceaseless budding, our borders rupturing, rounding down to stippled smallness. Then I was stone alone. I stood in a green field below a flimsy sky. I was hugely still. There was quiet around, within, just air and I. In time, faces with voices showed limbs, hands. Grunting, they hoisted my bulk. I said nothing, pondered where they would at last set me down. They broke me. They piled me up with my kind. Now we rest together, screened by trees who seated themselves in our braided bodies, thin skin, those high shifting limbs ours too. We are become a host, yet one, rooted, riveted, fingered arms sign our big thoughts in air, but we hold. Stillness is our wary way. We are grove, and we slowly think, slow we go back from stand to range. And the last poem I'll read is called What Want Brings. Gray rain seeps through the fall of played-out clouds, loops among hills, ragged mountains, flexes and thins cut contoured fields. This here, nearly parallel to another September when I, after tramping aged ley lines, leaned into standing stones that gently mocked my bent. Oh, I was in love with hardness, rocks tilting over landscape's green edge, words riven with meaning. I thought, mindless I, that I still owned some forever, and so walked right into those stones, touched their weighted flanks, shifted their quiet as if they were my true grandfathers, good old men who had only my best in their storied senses, showed in gray and grizzled faces deep listening. I wasn't the first, last. How many others waited there, forgot what they were given until in some gray-green season, those moments like gouged out uplands reach, returned, haggard and lonely gift. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Is Gary here?
We don't think so.
Okay.
Andy had some contact with him just before the reading started, but and he apparently, was planning to be here, but we haven't. Sandy, does that sound about right?
Yeah, I had had some
Yeah,
contact with him right
yeah.
before. And
Where is he living?
Yeah.
Where is?
he's like on the upper peninsula of Washington.
Oh,
So
I think we should assume he's not coming then. That
He may
technical
may
issue.
make it, but if he's got a power outage, it may not be possible. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's failure on.
Okay, I'll start then. First of all, Bertha and Jessica, they're just terrific readings, and I want to say how much I've really enjoyed the work.
Yes.
Ellen Bass's work first came to my attention shortly after I encountered the writing of future LA Poet Laureate Eloise Klein Healy, which is to say, that spot in the 1970s when a feminist canon began to gather momentum. The anthology Ellen co-edited, No More Mask, was one of those crucial turning points a half-century ago, and her own poetry has only accentuated the trajectory of those poems that are essential to our understanding of the continuity of American poetry. There is a palpable theatricality to the images of her poems. They lure us within their domain, onto the very stage itself of the startling juxtaposition, so that we don't merely perceive the metaphor, but inhabit it too, so that our consciousness becomes something otherworldly and yet very much of this world. To use a word that probably doesn't get used very much, if at all, in introductions at poetry readings, Ellen's poetry is edifying, not in the old sense of didactically reassuring of the moral certainties handed down to us by patriarchal nincompoops, but the new ethics of a queer aesthetic encompassing the gendered, inclusive enlightenment of mutual communities of affirmation. I present to you Ellen Bass.
Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. And Jessica and Bertha, thank you so much for your poems. Not only the pleasure of hearing them, but just hearing them makes me want to write. And that's the best, that's the just very best part to me of reading and hearing poetry. You really inspire me. So thank you so much. I haven't written very many poems. Well, I haven't finished very many poems since Indigo, and I have one. So I want to read it because it's feels so immediate to be able to read something that I've written just recently. And I wrote this during the California wildfires. I live in Santa Cruz, and I wrote it during the CZU lightning complex fire. It's called 74,000 Acres of Forest Burning. The kids go out for coffee. They arrived at 3 a.m. and we only have decaf. They've left chimneys in the rubble, contorted washers and dryers, the blistered street sign, the flaming heart of the redwood. Even here, the air hangs umber-colored, smoke thickened. Ash falls, flaking the bench, the path. It gathers in the veins of leaves, in the spider's webs. Sally carries photos and notebooks from the car and the lace wedding dress she still hasn't worn. Max brings a big bowl of heirloom tomatoes and his knives. Janet bakes an apple galette and cries. Here we tunnel into the day. Here we shovel the hours. I walk the neighborhood, crushing a thin crust. A man sleeps in his car, seat tilted back. A woman stands at the open door of her van. Inside, chickens flutter in cages. She gives them water. Back home, kibbles in the dog's bowl. The sun is neon orange on our kitchen wall. I pack a tinted photo of my mother, Janet's silver bracelets, the ceramica we schlepped the length of Italy. Sally vacuums. Now she thinks she feels the baby move. We strain toward the next briefing. The fire's moving on the ridge. It's 0.8 miles from their house. I cut parsley from the garden, wash off the greasy film. Bees keep on nuzzling into the blossoms. An ant carries a broken ant across the patio. A fire truck, 4 men in profile through the windows. They look straight ahead, jaws set. The dahlias nod their big flame heads in the breeze that's picking up. Breeze is what we don't want. The maple leaves rustle. And I'm going to read a few poems from Indigo. I think some of you may be here from a series of craft talks that I'm giving on the art of revision. And if so, you've seen, I'm going to read this poem, The Small Country. Those of you who have been listening to those talks have seen it in many stages of disarray. One of the things I'm teaching is the virtue of messiness. And, but here it is with its hair all combed, you know, in a reading, in a book, and it's called The Small Country. Unique, I think, is the Scottish tartle, that hesitation when introducing someone whose name you've forgotten. And what could capture cafuné, the Brazilian Portuguese way to say, running your fingers tenderly through someone's hair? Is there a term in any tongue for choosing to be happy? And where is speech for the block of ice we pack in the sawdust of our hearts? What appellation approaches the smell of apricots thickening the air when you boil jam in early summer? What words reach the way I touched you last night, as though I had never known a woman, an explorer, wholly curious to discover each particular fold and hollow, without guide, not even the mirror of my own body. Last night, you told me you liked my eyebrows. You said you never really noticed them before. What is the word that fuses this freshness with the pity of having missed it? And how even touch itself cannot mean the same to both of us, even in this small country of our bed, even in this language with only 2 native speakers. This next poem is called Black Coffee. My mother died about 15 years ago, and I'm sure that many of you who have lost loved ones know that although they die, they don't leave completely, that you do get to keep a great deal of what they have given you and your experience with them. And so this poem is in part about that. Black coffee. I didn't know that when my mother died, her grave would be dug in my body. And when I weaken, she is here, dressing behind the closet door, hooking up her long-lined cotton bra, then sliding the cups around to the front, leaning over and harnessing each heavy breast, setting the straps in the grooves on her shoulders. Reins for the journey. She's slicking her lips with fire and ice. She's shoveling the car out of the snow. How many pints of Four Roses did she slide into exactly sized brown bags? How many cases of Pabst Blue Ribbon did she sling onto the counter? All the crumpled bills, steeped in the smells of the lives who'd handled them. Their sweat, onions and grease, lumber and bleach. She opened her palm and smoothed each one, then stacked them precisely, restoring order. And at 10, after the change fund was counted, the doors locked, she uncinched the girth, unbuckled the bridle. She cooked cream of wheat for my father, mixed a milkshake with Hershey syrup for me, and poured herself a single highball, placed on a yellow paper napkin. Years later, when I needed the nightly highball too, she gave me this story. She'd left my father in the hospital. This time they didn't know if he'd live, but she had to get back to the store. Halfway, she stopped at a diner and ordered coffee. She sat in the booth with her coat still on, crying silently, just the tears rolling down. And the waitress never said a word, just kept refilling her cup. I wrote this ode to my dear dog, Zeke, shortly before he died. And I love reading it because it brings him back to me. He's also on my screen share. Whenever I forget and don't, do the whole screen for the screen share, everybody gets to see Zeke in his prime. But here he lived a good long life. He was 14 when he died. He was a big 90-pound, wonderful companion. Ode to Zeke. O breathing drum, O cask of dark waters, O decaying star, my barking heart, my breaking brother, what will seep into the space your body leaves? O huge 18-muscled ears, oscillating ossicles and cochlea, your busy canals, now hollow caves of quiet. I have said your fur is black, but you are silvered, rhymed with frost. You are the new moon. You are light in the dark house. How long will I see your shadow? O heavy hunk of existence, O great flank I have rested my head upon when I was too weak for human touch. Sleek leading man, you debonair dog, how people on the avenue stopped to swoon. O splaying legs once faster than rabbits, canines slashing flesh, urgent thug, unstoppable thrust. O happy snapping at the wind. What do you remember now that you are mudslide, glacier melting, cliff collapsing into the sea? I have memorized your milky breath, your ballet leaps and whirly gigging, your princely patience as the children dressed you. Soccer Zeke in jersey and shorts, one paw on the ball. Snorkel Zeke with mask and fins, bar mitzvah zik, and a yarmulke, and my father's silk talit. O my text of decrepitude, my usher to death, companion of 10,000 years. I'll fry you a fish, I'll sit by your bowl, eat from my hand, I have nowhere to go. I'm not very good at Instagram. I still have not quite figured it out, but now and then one of my students helps me post something. And if you are on Instagram and you're curious, you can see Zeke in his yarmulke and my father's silk talit on my Instagram page. I love that it's there. I will finish with the title poem of the book, Indigo. As I'm walking on West Cliff Drive, a man runs toward me, pushing one of those jogging strollers with shock absorbers so the baby can keep sleeping, which this baby is. I can just get a glimpse of its almost translucent eyelids. The father is young, a jungle of indigo and carnelian tattooed from knuckle to jaw, leafy vines and blossoms, saints and symbols. Thick wooden plugs pierce his lobes, and his sunglasses testify to the radiance haloed around him. I'm so jealous, as I often am. It's a kind of obsession. I want him to have been my child's father. I want to have married a man who wanted to be in a body, who wanted to live in it so much that he marked it up like a book, underlining, highlighting, writing in the margins, I was here. Not like my dead ex-husband, who was always fighting against the flesh, who sat for hours on his zafu, chanting Om, and then went out and broke his hand punching the car. I imagine when this galloping man gets home, he's going to want to have sex with his wife, who slept in late, and then he'll eat barbecued ribs and let the baby teethe on a bone while he drinks a dark beer. I can't stop wishing my daughter had had a father like that. I can't stop wishing I'd had that life. Oh, I know it's a miracle to have a life, any life at all. It took 8 years for my parents to conceive me. First there was the war, and then just waiting. And my mother's bones so narrow, she had to be slit and I airlifted. That anyone is born, each precarious success from sperm and egg to zygote, embryo, infant is a wonder. And here I am, alive, almost 70 years and nothing has killed me. Not the car I totaled running a stop sign or the spirochete that screwed into my blood. Not the tree that fell in the forest exactly where I was standing. My best friend shoving me backwards so I fell on my ass as it crashed. I'm alive, and I gave birth to a child. So she didn't get a father who'd sling her over his shoulder, and so much else she didn't get. I've cried most of my life over that. And now there's everything that we can't talk about. We love, but cannot take too much of each other. Yet, she is the one who, when I asked her to kill me, if I no longer had my mind, we were on our way into Ross, shopping for dresses. That's something she likes, and they all look adorable on her. She's the only one who didn't hesitate or refuse or waver or flinch. As we strode across the parking lot, she said, "Okay, but when's the cutoff? That's what I need to know."
Thank you, Ellen. Really
Wow.
heartbreakingly beautiful. Really wonderful work.
I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank you, Jessica Greenbaum and Bertha Rogers and Ellen Bass, for your time and your words today. I've been a longtime fan of all three of you, so this was a real treat for me. I'm sure for many people here. And yes, I'm sorry that Gary Copeland Lilly couldn't make it, but he probably got knocked out by the wind. So our next West East reading is Sunday, January 17th, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. You can email or Facebook message any of us for the Zoom link. And so that's it for tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.